Hey, this is Ben. This is the 24th stanza of The Art of Peace. There are 114 stanzas. I have begun defining for myself and for my family when they ask, what are you doing at so-and-so a time? And I've started calling it a peace practice or the art of peace practice. And what's interesting is how it gives me something to be rooted in. Every day has a part of my thought process. How am I going to get my peace practice in? And so there's an element of grounding, something keeping me steady as other things change. This has got to have some of your energy. This has to have a priority. You can build the rest of the day around it. So the peace practice has been grounding. The experience of that, the experience of the grounding is something I'm very familiar with. Every single time I interact with one of my students, the very first thing they have to do is connect and ground. Now that takes place, according to Armor Down, in two different experiences. So the first grounding, the first connection is to the world around you. Now, if you're a warrior, this is doubly important. You have had training, doesn't matter you've been to combat or not, you have had training that teaches you to be more alert to detail, more alert than to detail, is hierarchical, and it has a awareness of threat, awareness of effectiveness in response to threat. So these are all things that you have been trained. So it behooves you, I'm going to teach this to you right now, it behooves you to ground into the present moment. Now there's lots of ways to ground into the present moment. But what we do is we use the sensational experience to provide a window into the present moment because we know that our senses are taking place right now. Even though our minds are trained by our military training, starting in basic training, to be hierarchical, to be very attentive to detail, to be forward-thinking, to put the mission first. Because we've been trained, we know that we can come into the present moment, we can shift the power of our minds out of that thinking, that analysis, and into the present by being situationally aware. We've got the training inside of us, it's just been couched as something else, or our awareness hasn't been broadened. Man, that's all it really is. I work with officers at the War College. I work with veterans. I work with young people. It doesn't matter. We have this awareness inside of us, and if it's languaged right, most people just fall right in, and it's more like, oh yeah, duh. It's not oh my goodness, this is magical. Well, it is once you've seen it and you're like, duh. Damn, that's right in front of me the whole time. I have not been consciously operating at that level, because you operate at this level. You operate at presence all the time. It's just we've articulated the intellectual aspect of it. We've articulated our intellectual capabilities to the nth degree, and we're just now recognizing our awareness capabilities. And that also can be evolved to the nth degree. So we are putting those pieces together. So anyway, we become a warrior of situational awareness. Now, develop your situational awareness by interacting with your sensational experience. So, what's the broad experience? What's the big experience? What's the thing that's really showing up? Is it light and colored? Is it shadowed? Is it flowing? Is it soft? Is it heavy? Is it loud? Is it quiet? Does it have distance? Now, once you do that, come into presence. You got to send presence through your body. Why? Why do you need to send presence through your body? I can give this answer 100,000 ways, but the real thing, the thing that makes the most sense, is that you want to have good awareness and good connectivity to your spine. The backbone of something. Right? We know the euphemisms, we know the phrases, we know the jokes. He is the backbone of this organization. The offensive line is the backbone of the offensive football team. Integrity is the backbone of our institution. Those words, the backbone, are integrated into every culture. Any animal we kill has one. It's an essential piece of our beingness. It's also, for you warriors, the central alignment that's necessary for firing effectively. The position of attention. Strong, sturdy, stable. Backbone. Now, the way you create that is not by just strong backbone. That is the way a Neanderthal would do things. Backbone, straight, good. Nope, you got to be methodical. There is a step-by-step process. As you do this step-by-step process, you get better at it and you can do it faster, but you have to have the discipline to not just be like, backbone. You have to have the discipline to check your ground. And you check your ground with your capacity to feel. It's called introception. You have a capacity called introception, which means that you can go in and interact with what is going on right now inside your body. You can do that. You can tell other people what's going on, but no one can do that other than you. You are intimately connected to every aspect of your being, so you can do this, and you are the only one that knows. You're the only one that can be listened to. Doesn't matter how great the technology becomes, our internal environments will always, always, always be first and foremost our unique environment, our own personal unique environment. So, ground. In this context, ground is something that encourages you to pay attention to where you're touching something, where your body is touching the ground, the objects that are around you. So I found a new spot where I've been sitting. It's a little bit up away from the stream, and there's a root jutting across the bank of the stream, and I'm just kind of sitting on that root, and the pressure of sitting is typically on my ankles. My spine is slowly evolving, and so I'm real tight around my pelvis, and tight in this context means energy moves around these places. These places have been really locked up, like my lower back, the top of my buttocks, the front of my thighs, my hips. These regions of my body have borne the brunt of the pounding I've put through my being. Football, war, violence. And so I have just now become more experienced sensationally in that region. There's more choice for me down there as opposed to the past. So anyway, this new seated position gives me an easy way to get my spine in different positions, different alignments, and the alignments are taking place the same way you would align a shot at 300 meters. Subtle, real small alignments, because that tiny little alignment is going to have a huge impact on that round when it gets 300 yards away from you. So you make subtle corrections, not big corrections. So anyway, with this new ground, there's less pressure on my ankles. There's a nice new change at my tailbone. So the first place is your ground. The second place is your pelvis. And your pelvis is the bottom of your spine. Now there's tons more going on in the pelvis, but in the context of alignment, it's the bottom of your spine. So when I come into my pelvis, I like to shift around a little bit. And, shifting in the shape of a star. So, if you take your tailbone straight up to the middle, take it down to the right, take it up at an angle to the left, take it across to the right, take it down at an angle to the back left, take it straight up, and then find the middle of that. Once I found the middle of that, right, it's going to still move. It's not like a robot where it goes to a position and then it stops. It's like it's living. It's the way water moves in a container. It's the way water moves in a container. There's this sturdiness to it, but it's not still. It can get stiller. It can get very, very close to still, but it's still got energy through it. It's still got energy pulsing. There's an environment. So you're setting an environment when you come to your pelvis. Now, core. Core is your second brain. So you could argue it's your first brain. Yeah, so let's just say that your core is your first brain. So it's your guts, it's your there's muscle. I mean, it's the Japanese just call it your hara. Or the Japanese expression of this idea is representative of the hara. The yogis would call this space the third chakra. The Chinese, what do they call this? Dantian. The Chinese expression of this position, this space, is Dantian. What's some other words for it? Anyway, core is super sophisticated. So what I'd like to do is I like to just check if my core is feeling any pressure. So I'll let my gut fall out completely. I'll pull my guts in really tight. And then I'll try to find a soft middle. And if my core is not pressured in any way, if there's no gas, there's no hunger, there's not really anything down there, I just see it as a pool. A pool that's, I remember my buddy's wedding at St. Croix. It was these beautiful resort, and the resort was kind of on this beach, and to the left of the beach was this rock face, and if you climbed around the rock face, it just opened up to a shoreline that was just super interesting, rocky. I mean, the way the water had carved out the side of these rocks, it was just incredible. But there was this section, this pool, that was set off from the ocean. So the ocean's crashing into the rocks, but the water over time had carved out this pool. And this pool kind of stayed a constant level because it was always being fed and it was always emptying at the same time. So there were moments when, there would be a rush of water in and then there would be a bigger rush out, but it was always this kind of same level, and it was just incredibly beautiful. That's kind of what your core is. At times it can get overemphasized by certain things, whatever. That's another part of the practice. But just to say, core is very, very, very sophisticated. Now, heart space. Heart space is protective. There's the ribs. Ribs are at the heart space. The spine at the heart space is a little bit more sophisticated. So when you come up to the alignment of your heart space. You want to think about outside in, inside out. So the outside in, shoulder blades. Outside, shoulder blades. Ribs, back ribs, front ribs. Can you move your spine around at your back ribs? Shoulder blades. Heart space. So I think of the heart space as like a dome. And as I interact with the dome, if I'm tilting forward, am I tilting the dome backwards, right, or left? Everything's kind of hanging down from that dome. Now when I breathe in, I can feel the duality of the expression. So there's a expanding up, there's an expanding down. So while there's all this soft tissue hanging from beneath the dome of my torso, there's still this upness going on. It allows the shoulder blades to kind of dangle a little bit, which kind of allows the neck to lengthen and everything from the, I guess it's the occipital across to the front of the where the ears meet, and then right in front of the ears is the jaw. So I think of this, where the jaw connects to the skull, straight back down is the top of the throat down, and then across the shoulder blades, across the collarbones up is the bottom of the throat. I mean, think of how sophisticated your spine is at your throat. And then the final alignment is the top of the head. And so it's a matter of, in the beginning, it was a matter of what's the top of my head thinking, what kind of thoughts are coming into the top of my head. But now it's where is the top of my head? Now, you may have seen this on social media, but if you move your head out of alignment just a little bit, it creates a tremendous amount of extra strain on your body. Tremendous. Same way as if you make a big correction at a shot of 300 meters, it will have a big impact further down. So the slightest movement at the beginning could have a huge overall consequence. So that's the same with the head. And again, it's interactive. If the spine and the core is like contained water, the head is like contained air and ether. Air is, breathing in through the nose. It's real soft. I mean, you can think of how much movement you've got in your head. Think about how sophisticated and precise the cervical spine is. Lifting the head, tilting the head. You can turn, tilt, lift, pull back. You can make figure eights. But it's not just the movement, more airy, but it's also what's going on inside the head. So that's like kind of ether. It's something. Chinese, you call it qi, thought, whatever you want, energy. But it shows up in the form of thoughts, identification with, interaction with, change. You can interact with what your head's abilities are. Just like you can interact with your pelvis, although you can't do in your pelvis what you can do in your head. In your head, you can create movement like in your pelvis, and they can match and be similar, but your pelvis doesn't have the gear to create language or the idea experience the same way your brain does. So your brain can facilitate your pelvis moving, but your brain is what creates thoughts. Your pelvis can facilitate your brain's movement. Your pelvis can signal to your brain, but your pelvis isn't doing the thinking. Your pelvis is doing the signaling and the interacting. with the brain. Now, you could argue that the brain and the pelvis are completely interconnected, so one's not participating separate to the other. And that would be true. But what we're trying our best to do is use language to describe something that's totally and essentially experiential. So this is something for you to experience. The best thing I'm trying to do is keep your mind aware, keep your doubts settled, and show you new and interesting ways into your own personal internal environment. So the alignment of your spine is the second place that we always go. So the first place, the first place is your senses, grounding into what's happening right now through your senses. The second is the alignment of the spine at the ground, at the pelvis, at the core, at the heart space, at the throat, at the top of the head. Now, there's the breath in. The breath in puts it all together. Your breath is the complete package of interacting with the external and first levels of internal. Your first levels of your internal environment. Now the third level of your internal environment is your perception. Getting a little bit more subtle here, the perception of the internal environment. Now my perception of my internal environment is based on the experiences that showed up during my awareness of it. What's going on? What do I perceive? So perception's a pretty big thing. I remember I got into a beer drinking contest with a guy, I think he was maybe South African, a South African rugby player in a TGI Fridays outside of New Delhi. All to impress a girl. And he basically came after me about football not being as tough as rugby. So, just think about it. If you're a rugby player watching rugby, you're seeing things that are totally different than a football player. So, a football player watching rugby is going to perceive the exact same thing that you're watching totally different. His perception, her perception, will be that of football in comparison to rugby, and their perception, the rugby player's perception of the experience, will be according to their understanding of rugby. So, two people looking at the same thing, experiencing the same thing, very differently. Perception. So your perception of what's going on in the world around you, it's too cold, or it's rainy, or this or that, or my hips are tight, or I don't know what's going on in my feet, or I feel this or I feel that. Your perception of what's going on in your internal environment will have an influence on your readiness. Now, once you feel ready, once you've perceived readiness, you can move into the next level of awareness, and that is the I ams. I ams. I am this. I am that. I am that I am. So that's the rugby player and the football player in the argument. Football's tougher. That's perception. I am tougher. That's the next stage, mental volition. So that's fundamental beliefs. Now, fundamental beliefs come from every external all the way through into your perceptions, but they've been built over time. They're, as Laura Palmer would call, fundamental beliefs or limiting beliefs. In the context of maladapted, limiting beliefs. I am not as tough. I am no good. Now, getting into there, rugby player, rugby's tougher than football. Football player, football's tougher than football. Competition. I'm better than you. No, you're better than me. Well, let's prove it. Let's prove it, fucker. Let's prove it. So, to prove who was tougher, we had a beer chugging competition. And I don't know how this came up. I don't know how the let's chug beer, see who's better. But I knew I was good at this. I could drink beer fast, boy. Made me a man. And so I was like, all right, let's do this. So we got these 2 pint-size glasses, the long ones, the real long glasses, pint-size. We stared each other down and begin. Boom. Chugged that beer so fast that he was surprised by the speed. He was surprised by the speed, and he couldn't keep up without messing himself, so he quit 9/10 of the way through. I had already been finished, so I'm just staring at him, watching him lose in the face of this girl. And then, to rub it in his face further, I took his remaining beer, backwash and all, and chugged that. In your face, fuck you. And I got the girl. That night I got the girl too. We kissed. It's a big deal. It's a very big deal. I thought I was in love. We kissed. Oh, so proud of myself. I was the man. It was like the greatest achievement ever. And I thought I was right. I thought I had won. I had achieved. I was happy. See, we get into I am stuff, right? I had proven myself in battle. So, we alluded to it yesterday. But the mystery awareness of how that all came about and how it played out is something we'll talk about further. But getting back onto the topic of mental volition, this experience validated my fundamental beliefs. That if I was tougher, that if I was, wittier, if I was cooler, that I'd be better off and I'd get the girl. So that was validating. I thought I was in the right. I thought I had achieved this ideal. Well, the next couple days was just total suffering because the girl wasn't that into me. And so I turned into this needy, whiny kid. And I talked to her because I was at my cousin's house. His mom had married the French naval attaché to India. So we were at his house for 4 more days. And this is not a typical American environment, but it was Americans interacting like Americans in this environment. And so we talked on the phone, and I was just I was pathetic. I thought I had achieved this experience, but then over time it wasn't anything. It just turned into suffering. Why this happened? So why isn't this girl more interested in me? And it just didn't. I was so in my head about it, I didn't even realize. So it was just it was just this stuckness, this idea that kind of it fit with what happened. It fit with, the way I was a man. I was tough. I chugged the beer faster. I did everything right. Why later on am I having so much doubt and worry and fear about this girl? Why doesn't she like me more? All this stuff. And it just was totally irrational, but it was all consuming. And it really interacted with the fundamental beliefs I had about myself. And so that experience right there became fundamental to my being. I mean, I was convinced that I had to look a certain way, I had to be a certain way, I had to be this guy, this idea of masculinity, and that if I achieved it, I would transcend suffering. I would no longer suffer. And I went after that hard. I mean, I went to war to prove to myself that I was a man and I wouldn't have to suffer anymore. And it just took over me. It took over all my decisions. I was fixed on achieving this ideal without really practicing or having the awareness that I could do anything other. It was just who I was, and there didn't seem to be any choice in the matter. So as I practiced recognizing the external environment, taming the mind on the present, as I practiced doing that, as I practiced my alignment and seeing how my alignment interacts with things and how I can change, I began to notice that I had the choice to do these things. And the act of having the choice to do these things began to challenge some of my fundamental beliefs, challenge the notion that I couldn't interact with them or that I couldn't change them. It's like, well, if I can change where I put my awareness, if I can change my ability to be aware of sight and sound, or aware of sight, and then from sight go immediately to sound, recognize my capacity to interact with both. If I can choose where to put my perception, then that means that I have this ability to choose anything, right? And at first this was a novel idea, and it was more an experience of an idea, but then it started to become a more robust ability. So I began to notice if I was being caught up in a fundamental belief, and then I had the time to choose whether or not I wanted to be. Choose whether or not I wanted to be what was going on. It's very cool. It's very cool to see that, to recognize that. Now what's really tough, we kind of talk about this as the difference between the way the brain, the energy at brain can be manifest and energy at, say, core can manifest, is that there are aspects of my being that are so fundamental and so powerful that it feels like there's no choice. And it can happen so fast, like we talked about yesterday. It can happen so fast that before I know it, something's going on and I'm in it. And I'm just fucking in it. Rage, fear, anger. Basically everything's centered around fear, the manifestation of fear. I'm going to die. Someone I love is going to die. Fear. this was monstrously powerful. The art of peace is what gave me the awareness that I didn't have to be afraid. The first time I went through this practice, the experience was different in the context of I hadn't gone through it before, and I was still very much ensconced in my own limiting beliefs. And so as life unfolded during my first Art of Peace practice, over that 2 years, I did one post a week, 114 weeks. I began to recognize that the fear and the doubt and the anger and the rage would flow in and out of my being all day long, just at varying degrees. And as I started to interact with them through the practice, so the rage experience, the anger experience, the fear experience, okay, so my experience is fear. Is that necessary, or can I choose? Can I interact with it by choice? And the question was, well, can you? And so, okay, so now then I would tame my mind with presence. I'd align my body through my spine, and I'd create some space. I'd armor down from the edge to create some space. Now, building on top of that space requires interacting with uncertainty. So I was moving forward into a brand new environment with my life and with job and everything. So it was uncertain. So there was these moments that things wouldn't go my way. Someone would compete with me, or something wouldn't go the way I'd hoped, and I'd feel angry. I'd blame it on somebody. I'd be mad. I'd want to focus my anger somewhere. In those moments, instead of just being blindly pulled, I would choose. And because I was studying the art of peace, my choices were grounded. My choices were grounded in what I was studying. And so as I started making these choices, according to what the practice alludes to, I started to see that certain experiences I was having were unnecessary, and that I could influence them. As I began to influence those moments, it became evident that much of the way I conducted my life was uninformed, was ungrounded. It wasn't that I was weak or being foolish. It was or that I was softening and not being as tough or whatever. It was that I started to recognize the effectiveness of what the art of peace teaches. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go into La La Land where I'll just be at peace all the time and never be in competition. No, it wasn't that at all. It was still competition. There's still interacting with others. There's still assertiveness and receptivity. It's still there. Still go hard or go home. It's still there. But I started to see it as a choice to interact, a choice, a consciousness, and not a requirement. It's a piece, not the whole. And it just became more effective. From the perspective of competition, became more effective to blend with an environment instead of dominate it. Blending with environments as opposed to dominating them. And the reason I blend with the environment as opposed to trying to dominate it is that it's more efficient to interact with someone without causing them any kind of duress or without creating any kind of volatility. It's more efficient to do that than it is to overwhelm the environment and possibly create volatility in the other direction. My biggest problem with beating this guy's ass and winning the girl is I presented this intense environment. I created an environment of intensity, and that intensity really fell into my fundamental beliefs that I would achieve this highest level inside this moment, and my life would react accordingly. My life would be that intense, that fucking awesome. Why else would the event have happened if it wasn't to prove that? And then when life evolved and the next day and the day after showed up and life wasn't that way at all, it was all just a hyperinflation, and then it all grounded back down. I suffered. I suffered because the high always matches the low. The higher it is, the lower it goes. And so by fostering the creation of a high, I created the low. Blending, on the other hand, is what creates sustainability. And that sustainability fosters the creation of highs that are sustained. The highs that are sustained are what Mother Nature is, the evolution of what Mother Nature is. And so we can create that too. We can fall into that too. Fall into that path. And why the art of peace is valuable is it shows that path. It's where we want to go anyway. It's where we're trying to go. But it's actually the most effective way to get there. So at no time was I'm just going to turn into peace, man. Just peace, man. Nothing to do with it. It was the effectiveness. Wait a minute. You mean I can actually get all the things that I am kind of working towards? I can become this person that I want to become. I can live this life that I dream. If I follow the way. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's why this stuff's so great. Ooh, another long one. The 24th stanza of The Art of Peace is, crystal clear, sharp and bright, the sacred sword allows no opening for evil to roost. Crystal clear, sharp and bright, the sacred sword allows no opening for evil to roost.